Hi, hello everybody. Welcome back to Times Higher Education Student Webinars. Today we are hosting the RCA who are here to discuss all things arts and distinctive portfolios with you. We will be here with a few other hosts who will be here to discuss all of the questions that you may have. Please feel free to put those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen there, and we will get to those at the very end of our webinar. Obviously, if you have any questions throughout, please do pop them in, and don't worry, we will have someone answering either way throughout as well. Those on Facebook, hello, we will also be going to be talking to you and your questions as well throughout the session. So now I'm going to hand it over to your host, Gary.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Welcome everybody, and good afternoon from London, and possibly good morning, good evening. I know we'll have people from all over the world joining us today. First of all, I'd like to just introduce my colleagues, Steph and Katrina from the marketing team, who will be in the background helping us out throughout the session. Also, I'd like to introduce Sam Joseph. Sam is currently a student on the Graduate Diploma program here at the RCA, and also will be sort of interacting with your questions and throughout the session. So, and me, of course, good to introduce me. I'm Gary Clough. I'm the head of programs for Graduate Diploma. I'm a practicing sculptor, fine artist. My research practice is fundamentally around drawing. I think, first of all, to contextualize why me today. So the Graduate Diploma is a unique program within the context of the RCA, a postgraduate only institution for art and design, the only one in the world of that nature. And we are, as a program, the only non-postgraduate course. We are pre-masters. As part of the program, all of our students engage with developing a body of work and a body of knowledge and a set of new skills around how to engage at MA level. Also very much this notion of repositioning one's practice and thinking very much about how to prepare for master's level study and for engagement with industry. So a big part of that is the preparation and development of the portfolio. And what is the portfolio? And then where does the portfolio fit into our canon, let's say, or our lexicon of art and design language? So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to the application process, and I'm also going to speak to the specificity around the Royal College of Art's application and where the portfolio sits within that. And hopefully through that help sort of demystify it a little bit, but also really contextualize it as what it is, as this notion of what the portfolio is in a traditional term, but also maybe thinking about it in slightly different ways around this notion of what we like to refer to as publishing self. How do you actually create something that introduces you, not just in the sense of a particular set of components appropriate to MA application, but actually this notion of the portfolio? A term which basically means a collection of pages, but a term that is something that will be with you throughout your career. A career which will engage with numerous different projects. So your portfolio is really very much an archive. It's a living entity. And you would look at your body of work as a portfolio. And then with that body of work, looking at the criteria of, let's say, the particular function at hand, whether that would be an MA application, whether it would be an application for a bursary, a competition, or an application for a residency, or an application for a job. You would then tailor your portfolio in much the same way that you may tailor a CV based on a job description of a role you were applying for. So this is what we'll discuss today. Now, in terms of the RCA, one of the first things to look at is actually the application process. Now, the application process has two stages, stage one and stage two. Stage one is the first one. So this is really important, especially for any of you who have joined us today that are actually contemplating making an application for this September, which is still available for certain programs across the RCA. Now, stage one is where you obviously put in your initial information, but it is also the point where you say which program you're applying for. So when you get so when you've completed stage one and you go into stage two, you are then given access to specific course-related advice and guidance about what's expected from the portfolio. All courses are different, but there are some standard generic things that relate to the way we approach portfolios. So I'm going to speak to those generic components, but I can answer questions around some of the specificity as well of certain applications. But the most important thing is to go to stage two as quickly as possible, whether you're applying now or whether you intend to apply in September for 2024. Because then you will start to really understand. You can, once you can leave that as long as you wish. You have time to engage with the material and really understand what the head of programs are speaking about, and also looking at the criteria of the application for the specific programs. Now, in terms of the portfolio and application itself, so let's talk about the application first. So the application has two components, fundamentally, in terms of the visual side, 3 in total. So the first component is your personal statement. And then there is the portfolio, and then there is the journey. The journey is a 2-minute video to camera. Now, what I want to do is talk about the 3 of them separately, but obviously bearing in mind, of course, they are interrelated and they bleed across one another. But when you're looking at these 3 components, the statement, the journey, and the portfolio, you need to think about them doing 3 quite different things, yet related. So the statement. Well, within the statement, you know, this is a written statement about your intention to study at MA. So why? So why not the Royal College, but why do you want to study MA? Why is MA the right program for you currently? Or if it's grad dip, why is grad dip currently the right program for you? How have you come to that decision? And in terms of that decision, what's led you there? What's your prior experience? How has that prior experience molded you and informed you to get to this point? Not a list. It's not a CV, it's a statement. Also, within the context of the statement, you're coming to an MA. Now, it's a taught MA, but sometimes that notion of taught can be a little bit sort of confusing because it is fundamentally around the notion of self-directed research practice. So you're taught to engage with your practice. You're not taught practice as you would be within the BA context. So really think about what you're bringing. Talk about skill bases. Talk about context and critical understanding. What is it that feeds your research? What is it feeds your interest? Maybe you might include quotations or relevant information. Make sure you cite that. If it's information that is specifically from somewhere else, state where it's from. And I think also in terms of the statement, also think about, well, what comes next? Where would you intend to go post graduate diploma or post the MA? And think about that in the sense of not, I'm going to do this, because I think that's an unfair situation to put you in, but actually, what do you think will be the outcome? What are your aspirations of what you will leave with from the MA, and where those skills, that understanding, might position you within a particular industry or a particular sphere of knowledge? Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the journey. So the journey is a 2-minute video. Now, I think it's really important to think about what the video is. Now, and I'm going to start really with that premise of what it's not. Now, many of you applying may not have English as a first language. It's not a language test. What it's, if you want to even think about it as a test, which I prefer you not to in a way, It's much more about how you introduce your practice. Now, the statement has introduced who you are and your motivations. Your journey fundamentally will draw from the portfolio and it will respond to that. And within that 2-minute video, we want you to talk specifically about a section of your work or an element of your work or an element of your practice. And as I said, once you get into stage 2, there'll be specific prompts from each of the programs about how to approach it. But there are some really key things to remember, both about the journey and also about the statement, is that you don't need to tell us what we know, okay? So sometimes students lose vital moments, whether they're seconds within the video or whether they're sentences within the statement, sort of reiterating things that we're aware of, like, yes, we are a specialist postgraduate only institution. And yes, we are #1 in the world in that category. And we know these things and we're very proud of them, but you don't need to reiterate. So be also aware you're speaking to an informed audience. If you're applying to any of the programs, those people that will be engaging with your application are specialists in their field. So again, in terms of being economic with the way you write, you don't have to do long descriptive passages. We will understand if you cite an artist's name, a practitioner, especially within the field you're applying for. They will be known. So you don't need to give us chapter and verse. What we would like to know is why they're important, how their practice is potentially relevant to you and has influenced you, if that's appropriate to the way that you're writing. Now, in the video, if you're going to, to be honest, a good way of doing it is to do it something like a Skype or to do a webinar situation like this, or to use Zoom, or just use your phone. You don't have to have a full video crew. You don't have to get Steven Spielberg in to help out. And I would strongly advise you don't get a filmmaker to help you, because you'll end up with a pop video. And that's not really what we're after. We want to hear you speaking. So really what the 2 minutes is, it's actually how you would actually engage with staff at the RCA. You would engage on a one-to-one or a small seminar group situation, and you'd be speaking about what you know. You know, you are the expert in the field. You are talking to us about how you have engaged with something, how it's developed, maybe the challenges, or maybe specifically the sort of areas of research that it applies to. And it's good to script it. It's good to have some bullet points, but try to avoid sort of reading off screen. Try to be a bit more sort of natural about having a conversation. Doesn't matter if you trip up or, you know, you got your wrong teeth in. Doesn't matter. Just speak as you would, because it is about being yourself. We want to get a sense of who you are. And fundamentally, that notion of journey is very important. What is the journey that you personally took within the context of either a piece of work, particular element of a project, or a particular piece of research that relates to a project? And, you know, be yourself. So a couple of top tips that would really strongly advise. 2 minutes will seem like a short time. Don't be tempted to talk for 2.5 minutes and speed it up to 2 minutes. It's very tempting, but it does mean that we don't really get you, because it's a bit too sort of helium based. And we want to concentrate. Also think about how and where you present. So I've got a blank screen behind me, windows behind me. It's fairly sort of neutral. That's what I've chosen to use for today. But I made a choice. Think about what's behind you. For many of you, if you're talking about your practice, yeah, maybe you do have your work. Maybe it is the corner of your studio, your workspace. Maybe don't choose a public space. You know, you don't want stuff going on behind you that is competing for our attention. So hopefully that will be quite useful. I'm going to bring Sam in now, if I may, Sam. Because I know we've had a number of conversations about the video. But as a student in the process of doing this, what have you found the challenges around the video?
I think for me is, I mean, I love conversation, but there's something about suddenly being recording yourself, which is slightly terrifying. Well, actually, it's not slightly terrifying, it's very terrifying. And you do have to practice at it. And I think one of the challenges, I think I did about 30 recordings, and that's an extreme of that. But actually by practicing, it actually got easier. And I actually compared two of the videos that I made, one which was scripted and I tried to very slyly read off it, and then one that was more natural. And in the end, I chose the natural one because it said more about me and who I was. The scripted one, you know, it sounded good because I'd written it out and everything was in there. But it, you know, it could have been anyone reading off that, and it didn't really show anything about me. So I would definitely recommend, it's really showing you through the video, that authenticity and that kind of honest part of you that maybe there is ums and ahs in there, but you know, you're in a video, and I'm sure all the heads of programs would understand that it, you know, it's nerve-wracking unless you're very confident and used to doing these. But yeah, just be yourself.
Thank you, Sam. And I think that's a really, really honest and really sort of interesting sort of to hear that journey. And I think that notion of practicing is very important. And I think, again, even in the sense of when, your journey, this notion of discursive or, sort of self-directed study or discursive language is very important. And I think, it is important to maybe consider the fact that, you're thinking on your feet, actually, because actually that is what we do. We respond to stimuli or data that's coming in continually. So, scripting is good. And I think if you do script it, as Sam suggested, that's a really good practice. And then you'll have all of that knowledge then to maybe apply to a more sort of impromptu final take. So now we come to the portfolio. As I said, portfolio is a collection of pages. But within the Royal College, we have an application system that has up to 5 slots that you can actually upload work to. They're very big. They can take a lot of data. So they can take portfolio-based images. They can take standalone images. They can take video images and video files. Now, different programs, as I said, will ask for different things. Now, I'm going to speak to graduate diploma first, just to give you an idea, but also there are aspects of graduate diploma that do also have crossovers with many of the MAs. So within those 5 slots, what we ask at graduate diploma is that you upload 5 projects or 5 spheres of practice. Now, the reason we have the 2 potential approaches for graduate diploma is because we have some incredible applicants that come onto our program, and they come from an amazing background or range of backgrounds. Some will have maybe studied for 3 to 4 years, undergraduate level within art and design and creative industries, but might be in a position where they're actually looking to reposition their practice, maybe move their current major and reposition it in terms of a different or related major for MA level study. And they may be at a point as well in terms of different approaches to education in the world, because UK art and design education is very unique. Those of you who've studied in the UK at undergraduate level will understand that we don't do major or minor, which is more common in the US, in East Asia, in India, and in a lot of the European countries, as well as also South America as well. I mean, it's a very common way that you might more liberal arts. So in that sort of 4-year experience, you may actually only really start to engage with the real subject or the meat of your subject into that sort of 3rd or 4th year. So sometimes it's hard to actually have these succinct projects that really shout about, let's say, interior architecture, interior design, or product design, or fashion. So again, we attract students that want to come to the graduate diploma to actually develop those and develop them further. The other aspect of graduate diploma is we see a lot of applicants that have been practicing and they have a body of work, a portfolio, but they've not come from a traditional art and design route. So in terms of art and design skills and academic skills for art and design, it's all quite new. And actually coming to the graduate diploma will set them up for MA study. So if we backtrack to those two approaches, either 5 projects or 5 spheres. So if you are a student who has come from an art and design background, the notion of 5 projects is a quite straightforward way of thinking about portfolio. Okay, this is a project, this is another project, this is another project. And you give us a sort of a, I suppose, an analog experience of your practice. If that's not quite the case and you come from a different background, especially if you're coming from a background where you've spent time in industry, often what you'll be missing is the journey of the work. You will have a lot of final outcomes, but actually industry is about outcome, and you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily asked or encouraged to keep things as you would do in the context of a BA in creative industries or creative arts. So maybe the spheres of practice would be quite different and a better way to approach it. So this idea of maybe recording and responding is a sphere. So within there, that might be drawing, it might be photography. It's the way you collect images, the way you respond through skill bases to record things. Another one may be materiality, how you engage with material. That may still revolve around drawing, painting, printmaking, or it may evolve around new materials. Materials related to different spheres, such as fashion, such as product design. Other spheres may include writing. Many of you may come from backgrounds where you've done quite academic degrees. So actually you've engaged with a lot of very relevant creative discussions or creative sort of spheres, but you've done it through writing. Now you can include that in your portfolio, and you can include that as a sphere or project. Other aspects might be commercial, or they may be other outcomes around project management. So it's thinking about you. And this is the most important thing about the portfolio. It's yours. It's an individual portfolio. And I noticed actually, one of the first questions that jumped in is, how do you stand out? The way you stand out is to be yourself. There is no trick. There is no hidden agenda. We do not have a secret sauce somewhere that we're not letting you have. We are expecting individual students with individual experience, unique individual journeys, who are appropriate and ready for us to work with at MA level. And that's really what the portfolio needs to sing about. Sam, I'm going to sort of bring you in again, if you don't mind. And just in terms of the portfolio, I think one of the things that many students not struggle with, but maybe question is, what would you expect a project to have within it in the context of a portfolio?
Well, for me, it's definitely looking at the aspects. So looking at the skills, is there the skills relevant, or is there evidence of, even if it's the emerging skill, that could be developed? It could be something on the course that you're interested in exploring, but only knowing a little bit about. So for me, was digital design. I wasn't I was at the start of it, so very basic, and that's obviously changed. So my portfolio now applying to MA is completely is very advanced in digital, because I've spent time focusing on 3D and CAD design. Who you're inspired by and who are your precedents is important, but obviously not to include the imagery, just referencing. If there's anything that you're interested, so it might be concepts or philosophies or theories. So especially in the beginning, it might have been an emerging idea, especially like me, if you've come from sort of a multidisciplinary background and you've been out of education for a period of time, what are your interests? What is it that inspires you to create? And is something that does need to be included in your portfolio. And I think when I can remember back applying to the graduate diploma course, was literally getting everything out on the floor and finding a common theme, whichever I'd been into, whether it was fashion or photography and teaching. What was it that actually was my kind of core inspiration? And having everything laid out in front of you, you can pick out those things, which I think is then a really good element to put into your portfolio as well.
No, thank you, Sam. I think, you know, you've captured you've captured a lot of information there, and I think really relevant information. I think in terms of that project, you know, just to sort of praise you in a way, it's like, it's really, you know, we want to see beginning, middle, end. It's not quite that simple, but you can see it in those simplistic terms. So what do we mean by beginning is basically, what did you look at? What excited you? And how did you engage with that material? How did you collect? How did you synthesize that? Then the middle is very much sort of that continuation of the synthesis, the continuation of the development. How did you respond? Sam mentioned, who were you inspired by? Who were you looking at? Who you engaged with? What philosophies? What contextual discussions? What contemporary philosophies, arguments, or zeitgeist or moments that you engaged with? How did that change the journey? And I'm going to keep using that word journey. You know, where does that sort of really change within the project? And then this notion of the end is that, well, is it the end? Let's maybe talk about it in a different way, not as an end, but maybe where you resolved it, or to the point of resolution you are now or were then. So yes, it may be a series of artifacts, a series of things presented. If it is around a particular discipline, then think about how it would have an audience and maybe what that audience would be. So think about how you present it in the context. If it's a product, maybe it should be presented in the context in which it's used. If it's three-dimensional, think about how you engage with that digitally. Also, in terms of fashion, for example, you know, one of the prerequisites of the fashion application is that it's all through video, because this notion of it not just being three-dimensional, but an object of time, something that moves, that changes, that has a life related to, but not specific to the figure, also specific to space, time, context. And I think it's really important as well to think about this notion of work not being at the end. You know, you're coming here to the RCA or going on to MA to actually continue a sphere or a theme of research. It's not ended. We never really end what we're doing. We keep sort of engaging with certain topics. Now, there'll be points where we say, well, that's where I've taken that particular moment now. And this might be that notion of end or resolution point. So again, when you're presenting the pages of your portfolios, one of the really important things to think is about how you do that quite concisely. It's really important that you remember that your portfolio will be viewed on a laptop. So think about the format of a laptop. Think about that notion of, you know, very much the landscape format. Also think about the slides. Now, if you're going to include maybe sort of 3 to 4 slides within a particular project, but don't cram them full of information, okay? You don't have to shove everything in. We do want to see that you have the ability to edit and be concise. And many of the programs ask very specifically for you to send just images and not actual slides. Other programs ask for things that really talk about more journey-based and this notion of how you show process, growth, and journey. But if you look at contemporary art practice or painting or the fine art disciplines, they ask for image. But you can still talk about journey through images. Even if it's asking for 10 images, it may be a series of drawings that lead to a series of paintings, a series of video-based outcomes or three-dimensional outcomes or print-based outcomes. So, but what they don't want to see in a fine art context, which they would prefer to see in a design context, like both interior design, product design, School of Communications, is actually that development, that journey. They want to see how you've engaged. So in your first slide, which may talk about what you looked at, it maybe use 2 slides instead of 1. Don't just cram everything into little tiny boxes because we can't see it. And in terms of the text, think about the text being quite clear and concise, you know, what it is, but also, as Sam said, contextually state what it is. If you name an artist, name the artist. You don't have to include their work. avoid cramming the slide with lots of downloaded information. It might be really exciting and very important to your practice, and you have analyzed it, but by just showing us the information doesn't really show us how you've used it. Speak to it and show us how it's taken something forward, not just presenting it. So again, it's about being quite concise and clear. We often use terminology like hero image, the idea, well, that's what you want us to see, show us it. If you are thinking around this notion of the mood board, which is, again, something that's very, very particular to certain design fields, then make sure the mood board is relevant and not just about a mood board that you did to get somewhere, but actually what is it doing in the portfolio? Think about the text which accompanies it, stating what this did, why it was important. Often we see students include slides that maybe have mind maps on. Well, they can be really exciting, but to be honest, they can also really, they're for you, fundamentally. They were a process. Now, if your work is very much around this and the mind maps become part of the way that you're presenting final ideas, then great, service design comes to mind, as well as communication design. But again, you don't just have to show us, I can do a mind map, unless it's really relevant to what you're saying. Back to that beginning, middle, and end. I think the other thing about how you present your work, now, very important, as I said, about being concise. Try not to be tempted to just fill the slots with 92 PDFs, okay? Now, I'm being very straightforward because we can't look at them in that format. We're going to select, and you've got no way of choosing. We're going to choose the wrong ones. We're going to just have to sort of cherry pick. So help us. We are your audience, and you are sending us some information. So think about being quite concise and being quite directed. But as I said, there's a lot of really specific information in the stage 2 point of the application around those specific disciplines. But I can speak to those in more length. I think the other thing that's really important is also to really do your research. Now, obviously, this is a great time at the RCA. We just have 1 week of public outputs from our MA1, and we've got our outgoing show of the MA2 next week at Trim Brewery, which will be very exciting, and you'll see actual work, but it's also a fantastic online platform that's available as well. And I think it's really important to look at the programs, look at the work that is being produced, and think about where your work fits in. So look at fashion, look at the work that's happening in fashion, and think about, well, where does my work fit into this? And same in terms of visual communications or programs like animation or digital direction and contemporary art practice. Where does contemporary art practice sit outside or within the context of the traditions of sculpture, painting, and printmaking and photography? So that information is there. Go to the website, really go through it. And I know the websites aren't fun, they're not the easiest things to get through, but you need to spend time doing this. Do come to open days as well, and come to events like this. There'll be others coming up as well. It's very important to keep engaged with us throughout. I think what I'd like to do now is really maybe now go to questions, because I think there's already some really interesting questions coming through. So I'm going to, there's quite a few there. So I'm just going to try and sort of jump in and out of them here. In terms of, is it possible to have a one-to-one session for portfolio advice? It's tough to actually facilitate that. There are things that we do throughout the year, like portfolio surgeries. They are generally specific to programs, and they will be advertised on our website. We do also have a, all right, Katrina's going to answer that question live. Please, Katrina.
Sorry for the confusion there. Gary, that one is over to you. I think I filed that one in the wrong folder, so apologies.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Yeah, so as I said, there will be specific things around sort of one-to-one portfolios that might come up. I would suggest as well, we do a portfolio short course. It's actually running at the moment. That is something you might want to look at as well. That also includes elements of that as well. But unfortunately, it's just very hard with the amount of people that are interested in RCA to actually organize one-to-one experiences. Okay, so where are we? Okay, so I'm going to start with Stephen at the bottom here. So this is around requirements for the MEd program. In terms of, it's a research, to my knowledge at the moment, the way to approach that is to send in a research proposal. And again, if you go into the stage 2 application, it will cite it very clearly, Stephen, what's needed. You obviously have an opportunity to add additional images and information. So if you are coming from a practice base, you might want to include that. If you're not, then it's not necessary or required. But fundamentally, it's about a statement of intent and why you are prepared for and why the MEd is appropriate to you and your prior background. Those are the key components of that particular application. How many pages would you recommend per project, and how many projects in case you, in the case of applying for MA design field? Again, there are specific sort of guidance that, again, you can find in the stage 2 application. But as a rule of thumb, they vary. I mean, comms is quite big, up to 15 pages. And within 15 pages, if you're talking about 5 projects, then that's 3 pages each. If you're talking about 3 projects, that's 5 pages each. I think there's scope to think about it in a bespoke sense. It is your portfolio, as I said before. I think in aspects of when you say the MA design field, it's quite broad design. Within product design, they ask you to really include aspects of journey. In terms of craft, they talk about this notion of outcome as journey. One of the things I would say about journey and process, and again, I'm going to quickly bring Sam in on this one because we've spoken about this, about things to avoid in terms of presenting process within your portfolio. Sam, what do you think?
Yes, I went a little bit overboard, I think, with a lot of process, and I had a very cluttered portfolio at one point, which had to be very heavily edited. I think you have to really remember that what are those images and what you're putting in there, how valuable is that? And also, remember that the heads of programs and tutors who are going to be looking at this are, experienced in their field. They're experienced leaders in their field. So you don't need to put everything. It's that selection and being just really mindful of what you're choosing and what value that has to the application process. Yes, yeah, it's trying not to go overboard. So what I tend to do, get everything down to begin with and then edit and give that space, because if you can imagine if you were looking at a page just full of things, of very complicated detailed miniature images, because you're trying to cram everything on there, it's very difficult really to see the clear picture of what it is that you're actually trying to say or trying to show in your work, in your practice.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think it really outlined, I think, again, just this notion of, again, I was talking specifically to Jonathan Boyd, sort of head of programs of jewelry, he said, I don't need to see a piece of metal being placed above a Bunsen burner. I sort of know how that works. I just want to see what you did with that piece of metal and how it functions and where it functions and why it's jewelry or why it's engaging with the body. I'm going to jump around a bit with questions. There's a question here now, anonymous attendee. Are we able to have a mixture of projects and spheres or work, or is it only 5 projects or 5 groups work? It can be a mixture. I think I am speaking, as I said, to graduate diploma, the application process. So think about that one. I think the importance is to really think about why you're mixing it. And I think mixing projects is great. But again, it's about this notion of if you're applying for a specific MA, maybe not so much graduate diploma, where we know you are still in a process of trying to navigate and understand your process. So you might be coming in for quite disparate sources. Quite clear you're applying for a specialism around sort of fine art or design or fashion, but you have had multiple experiences. But as at MA level, they would expect to see a real sense of trajectory in your projects. Now, yes, there may be something that's maybe performative related, something that is painting based, something that is photography based, but they would want you to be very clear why those projects are related to one another as a body of work pointing to your engagement with a subject at MA level. So quite different to grad dip. So where are we? Let's I'm trying to get, so if I miss questions, do help me out, guys, because I'm working my advice. How do we submit portfolio once we've added all the sections on PebblePad? Well, again, follow the instructions clearly. The most important thing to do is when you submit it is to make sure once you can see all the assets are there, you always complete the final processes, which is to share. Okay, so again, follow the instructions. They are there. Go through them one by one and follow the process. And then the final moment is to share. And that is how PebblePad works. Is it all digital? Yes, applications are all digital at this stage. Do I need to focus on a particular sphere if my goal is MA in that sphere? I think, again, by sphere, I think, again, it's depending where you're coming from. As I said, if you're coming from a multidisciplinary background, as Sam sort of explained her journey, then you may have elements of interior-based work, you may have elements of drawing-based or materiality, but are applying, in the case of grad dip, to design, three-dimensional design as a sort of pathway and trajectory, and within that might be an MA in interiors or design. So I think we'd want to see that you are applying in the graduate diploma terms for a sphere that makes sense of where you are now. But graduate diploma is a place where you may see your sphere change or you may see your process change. So Sam, could I just again bring you in, because I know you've been on quite a specific journey within grad dip.
Yeah, so I came in on the pathway of interior and spatial design. Again, as I mentioned before, coming from a very multidisciplinary background. And through the journey, and it really has been a journey, is I used I used very much photographic practice in my development to get to the design. And that was kind of quite a struggle when you're really situating yourself within a pathway or within a sphere. And what I really had to do was really look at the theoretical aspects of that and how I sat with maybe other practitioners and precedents who may work in this sort of multidisciplinary way. But I think as the course has gone, I'm very well situated now that I am a designer of spaces, but I use photographic and digital theoretical concepts and theories as part of the design process, which is now very clear. In the beginning, it was not particularly clear on how my work was presented. There was that sort of ambiguity. Are you are you a digital artist or are you a spatial designer? And it's knowing where you sit in context of those disciplines to then be able to really situate yourself and direct yourself. So coming to apply for interior design, I'm very clear on where I sit and what my practice is. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sam. There's a number of questions that still seem to be going around this notion of mixing spheres or projects. And I think within the context of graduate diploma, it's fine to have some projects and some sort of spheres of practice and then maybe interrelation. It is actually just about how you talk about your practice, and it is individual. So yes, there's no problem about it being bespoke. I think if you're looking at a particular, there's a couple of questions here, one about contemporary art practice. In contemporary art practice, they would be expecting you to show how you engage with very much this notion of public engagement, public output of work, and how your work engages with audiences, and it engages through a particular language and where these audiences sit. You would be asked to put in a number of images, which would be outcomes, bodies of work, pieces of work. They may be, maybe 3 images around one particular project. If say it was an installation-based project, or it was an interactive-based project, or a photographic project that also engaged with the audience. And so the images really would come together, but it will really relate to how you speak about it, because they really want to know about the context of your practice. They want to know how the images have been formed, how they've functioned, how they've been analyzed, how they've been reflected upon, and how maybe they might go forward. And then again, maybe how they relate to other aspects of the portfolio. An interesting question here around somebody with a background in creative industries, in curatorial project management, talking about this notion of, how far back? Well, I think in terms of, if it is a direct application to curation, I think if the projects are really in depth, which often they are in terms of curatorial projects, because they will clearly have a very specific curatorial sort of overarching identity. Why was this work brought together? What was the context of the work? What was the what was the conceptual nature of bringing that project together? But also as well, there may be interrelated elements. Might be an education program engaged with it, might be a community outreach project engaged with it. So actually something like a curation project could be very, very broad. So maybe you might find 2 projects is enough. You don't need to go beyond. There's nothing wrong in going back if you feel it's relevant. Often, again, from a graduate diploma perspective, students do have life before grad dip. So obviously we advise students, if they do include projects before that within their application, they should, but they must also try to contextualize it with the work they're doing now. So I think if you're going back, you don't have to just show up like, I've done this, I've done that, it's all show a sort of real sense of why these elements are relevant to what you're doing now, because the projects you're doing now are the ones that will be taking you forward into your MA, what you do at MA. Please could you elaborate on how instructors who are not working with their own and just in academia, how can they incorporate work into their portfolios, maybe undergraduate portfolios? How should they create work if they're not too occupied in the academics? Right, I hope I've understood the question. I think if you're talking about the sense that you're not coming from an academic background and you're working outside of an academic sphere, and how do you put that into a portfolio, then I think it's very important that you just work from your knowledge. Do remember, when we look at an application, we will see your personal statement, we will see your information, we'll see your prior education background. So if you've got a background that is within engineering or mechanical engineering, then we won't be looking for a specific set of skills around, let's say, product design or interior design, or things are very much around a sort of a aesthetic understanding. Maybe it's a very different understanding, but you're showing within your portfolio what you've done, and it will be specific to your knowledge. So I think it's okay to include things that you might not consider to be interior design, but actually I've got a background. An example, we had a student about 2 years ago, they were a structural engineer. They applied with a body of photographs and they came onto the grad dip and went into interiors, and then graduated from MA 2 years ago. So they found their way through, and they worked on what they had. They didn't have that traditional background. Coming from a 4-year bachelor's degree in transport design, fabulous. Want to continue a master's in intelligent mobility. How will the teaching in the course differ from what I studied at my bachelor's? Well, again, coming back to what I said earlier about taught MAs, there will be specific projects to engage with. And within intelligent mobility, there are projects that have external and internal inputs, all of which are very industrial focused and very sort of sector focused. But why it will differ is it won't give you a very specific brief. It will be much broader for you to engage with. And I think in terms of coming from transport design, it sounds like a perfect route. But again, it's showing within the portfolio how you are wanting to engage with maybe a very specific element of transport, something that is something it's not quite a PhD. We talk about new knowledge, but masters is still an aspect of like new engagement. And not necessarily this notion of problem solving, but problem finding. Maybe think within your portfolio that you're saying, well, this is what I've done, but these are the areas that I really am intrigued with engaging with further, because I think they are really important, and use your portfolio to demonstrate those areas and speak to it both in the statement and within the context of the writing in the portfolio. Best number of pages, always go by the advice from the particular course. They will be very specific about what they're looking for. As I said, within the graduate contest, we suggest around about sort of like, max 5 pages per project or sphere. How many pages would you recommend? Again, many projects in the case of like MA design field. Again, it will be stated, do take the advice and guidance within stage 2, and it will be very clear. Again, do think about how you can be quite succinct. Innovation design, engineering, product design courses, sort of projects offer greater scope for the portfolio in terms of engaging readers and showcasing skills. It's quite straightforward. Does the portfolio process include intelligent mobility programs? Yes, it does. Yep. Yeah, there is a portfolio element of that program, as there is many. Still don't know if the programming interest is opening in 2024. Again, I can't answer that question, but it will be answered, I think, within the context of the website. It might be something to be directly answered by a typed answer from the marketing team. It says here, are there different selection criteria between stage 1, 2, and 3? Not in terms of the project, but in terms of scholarships, there are. And again, I think that information will be available on the website for you, and can be gleaned directly from our marketing team. How big? But like I said, we will view your portfolio on a laptop, so we won't be so do think about the notion of a laptop screen as a page. Think about what you can see. You're looking at Sam and myself and 5 other boxes. That's a lot of information. You might want to put some space in between it. Don't be frightened of white space. Don't be frightened of blank spaces. It's like a gallery. You need space around things. So Mary, when building a portfolio, it's multidisciplinary creative, i.e. design, illustration, would you suggest someone showcase their skills? Do you think it's possible for someone to show both? Through my experience, I've been told to only lean into showing one skill. I think, again, if the project that you're showing or the body of work you're showing has in its root or in its sort of core a particular skill base, whether that's 3-dimensional, 2-dimensional, whether it relates to garment manufacture, relates to the materiality within, say, an interior project, or in this case, illustrative work that sort of forms a sort of a spine or basis to a larger outcome, then include it. I mean, it's part of the process. I think they're tools. I think as so is writing, so is how you describe your practice, just as the journey video is a tool. So I think in that case, don't be frightened to include multiple skill bases, but you don't have to showcase it as I can do this, I can do this, I can do that. showcase in a sense, through these, I've developed this. And without these, this development wouldn't have been possible. Another one on graduate application, how many pages would you expect or ideally like to see? Again, I would say within a project, 5 pages is plenty. Again, avoid multiple JPEGs. Is GPA important for application? Fundamentally, there are clear stipulations around GPA and around application. It's all within each of the programs. But fundamentally, it is the portfolio we're looking at. And especially from a graduate diploma's perspective, we see people from very many different backgrounds. So I can see we're coming to the end. 4 minutes to play with. I was wading my way through the questions. I haven't quite made it. Hopefully, it's been useful today. I'd like to thank Sam for being there and for me sort of leaning on you and for you sharing very much your own personal journey.
Thank you, Gary.
And I also like to thank Steph for your help today, and obviously my colleagues as well, Stephanie and Katrina. I think my parting words would be, remember one thing: you are an individual applicant. We're looking for individuals of creative and problem-based engagement that are going to really excel. We're here to help you. We want to sustain you on a course that's right for you. Work from what you have, and there is no secret sauce. You are the secret sauce, and we'd like you to come to the RCA.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for the presentation. A lot of valuable information in there. We also have quite a few questions there. But do not worry, to those who didn't get everything answered, we will send those over to the guys at RCA, and they will get out in contact with you very shortly. Sam, Gary, thank you for all of your help. Do you need any other passing words of wisdom? I believe you put a little bit there just now, but anything else that you want to add?
Sam, would you have anything to, in terms of people, applicants, as you are yourself at the moment?
Yes, I mean, if you're applying to the graduate diploma, I would, especially if you've been out of, as I said before, out of education, it is a brilliant way to really cite your practice, really have the chance to explore. If you're applying to MA, then, making sure that you read all the information. It's really important to read on the website and look at the work. And if you do get a chance to see the shows, it's a great opportunity also to speak to students. I went last weekend, and it was really exciting to speak to students of the course that I'm applying to. So again, it's sort of doing your homework and seeing what not only can the course do for you, but what can you do as to be part of the course as well. How are you going to work with others on the course and across the school. Yeah, thank you and good luck.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing to say. Good luck, and we look forward to seeing your applications in the future.
Amazing. Thank you guys for attending, and thank you for your presentation. And to those online, we will be sending this over to you very shortly for those who couldn't make it today. So we will be in touch from tomorrow. All right, everybody, have a lovely day or evening wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.